Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. I didn't see it coming at first. Lucy and I had always had a solid marriage, or so I thought. She was the kind of woman who made everything around her shine, our social gatherings, family events, even those routine evenings out to dinner. Lucy could work a room with ease, charming everyone from family members to our friends and even strangers. People would always tell me how lucky I was, how Lucy had a spark, a light. And I agreed. But maybe I saw her light too brightly, and it blinded me to the shadows lurking just beneath the surface. It started slowly. First, her work picked up. Lucy had always had a busy job as a customer ambassador, though I never fully understood what that meant. She called it client relations, which, to me, sounded like endless small talk with people I'd never meet. But over time, her hours grew. At first, I was supportive. A good husband should be, right? She'd come home, breathless, talking about the new projects and big clients she was bringing in. I'd watch her, her cheeks flushed from excitement, and feel proud. We were building something together, or so I thought. But then her enthusiasm began to wear thin. The late nights became regular, and so did the weekend trips, the client dinners that went long into the night, the business trips that seemed a bit too frequent. One Friday evening, she told me she had a last-minute work trip to Chicago. "It's just for a couple of days, Mark," she said, her voice carrying that nonchalant tone she used whenever she wanted to sweep something past me. "I'll be back Sunday night. It's nothing. Just a conference and some team-building exercises." I nodded, but something tugged at me. There was nothing unusual about the trip itself, but I couldn't ignore the look in her eyes, faintly guarded, as if she was waiting to see my reaction. We'd been married for nearly a decade, and I knew Lucy like the back of my hand. Or so I thought. I tried brushing it off as overthinking, the kind of paranoia that can sink a relationship if you let it. But the feeling gnawed at me. The next day, I mentioned it to a friend over drinks. Rick was a pragmatic guy, quick to laugh off most things, but this time, he looked at me seriously. "Maybe she's just really focused on work, man. You know how demanding these corporate gigs can get. But," he added, pausing thoughtfully, "keep an eye on things. Just in case." And so I did. It wasn't like I went full-on spy mode right away, but I started paying closer attention. I didn't want to be one of those guys, the ones who obsess over every little detail, who read into texts and get paranoid about phone calls. But it was hard to ignore the signs, especially as they became more obvious. About a week after that conversation, Lucy left her phone at home one evening. She'd gone to the grocery store, and I was in the living room watching TV when her screen lit up. My eyes drifted toward it almost by instinct, and there it was, a text from someone named Mike. The message wasn't exactly explicit, but it wasn't something you'd expect from a work contact either. "Missed last night already. Hope you're thinking of me." My heart pounded, the words embedding themselves like a splinter under my skin. I held her phone in my hands, staring at it. Should I read more? Should I confront her? Or was I jumping to conclusions? When Lucy came back, I tried to act normal. She noticed her phone wasn't where she'd left it, though, and her face shifted just slightly, enough for me to notice, but she recovered quickly. "Did I leave my phone in here?" she asked, a casual smile playing on her lips. I handed it to her without a word, my eyes carefully watching her reaction. "Yeah, it lit up, so I figured it was important," I replied, keeping my tone light. She glanced at the screen, her eyes darting over the message, but she simply locked it without a second glance, as if she was deliberately avoiding my gaze. That night, lying in bed next to her, the usual comfort and warmth felt distant, almost foreign. I could hear her slow, steady breaths as she drifted to sleep, but I was miles away, locked in a spiral of doubt. I wasn't ready to confront her, not without more than a vague text from someone I didn't even know. Still, a plan started to form in the back of my mind. If Lucy was hiding something, I would find out. And I'd make sure there was no room left for lies. The next morning, I felt a surge of determination. I decided to keep tabs on her, not in a way that made me feel like a creep, but just enough to put my mind at ease. Over the next few weeks, I tracked her patterns, noticing that the late nights followed a certain rhythm, a certain pattern that fit more with someone's personal life than a corporate schedule. I began digging, reviewing phone records, looking through credit card bills, even noting the names of business contacts she mentioned, storing the details for later. One day, while she was out of the house, I went to her car to grab something. As I searched through the glove compartment, I found something tucked beneath a stack of papers. It was a package of protection, discreetly hidden under a pile of old receipts. I froze. There was no reason for this to be there, not for a married woman who had no reason to be with anyone else. That discovery struck me harder than any words could. I stood there, gripping the package, feeling the pieces fall into place. That was it, there was no innocent explanation. Lucy had been cheating, and I was no longer a husband, I was a pawn in a game I didn't even know I was playing. I spent the next week pulling myself together, balancing the need to confront her with the need for solid proof. She'd talk her way out of anything less, spin some web of half-truths that would only lead to more frustration. I wanted everything lined up, ready to shove in her face so she couldn't talk her way out. The following Sunday, Lucy was set to leave on yet another conference, this time in Philadelphia. I watched her pack, feigning interest, while my mind raced with plans. I'd wait for her to return, then show her every piece of evidence I'd collected, leave no room for denial. She'd have to look me in the eye and tell me why she chose lies over loyalty. Before she left, she paused in the doorway, flashing me her signature smile, a hint of softness in her voice. "See you Sunday, Mark." "Love you," she said, almost like she meant it. "Yeah, love you too," I replied, my voice a hollow echo. As she drove away, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet resolve settling where my doubts and pain had been. I knew what had to be done, and I wouldn't let her get away with this. The house felt like a museum the whole weekend Lucy was gone. Silence echoed around me, every room too clean, too still, almost hollow. I'd never felt our home this empty before. Usually, Lucy's things filled every space, the scent of her perfume in the air, her books left open on the couch, her shoes by the door. But now, those little touches felt like a mockery, like an insult. I spent most of Saturday digging deeper. I knew enough to feel the betrayal, but I wanted to be thorough. I scrolled through credit card statements, meticulously noting down the times and places where she had spent money. Dinner charges from upscale restaurants when she was supposed to be at work, random hotel stays I had never heard about, and a suspicious series of Uber rides during work trips. Every detail added up, each charge on the credit card like a stab to the chest. Sunday afternoon, I was in our living room, sorting through a pile of receipts, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "Flight delayed," she wrote. "Should be home by 8. I read the message over, feeling a familiar twist of resentment settle in. She was lying again, no doubt spending extra time with him under the guise of a delayed flight. I didn't respond. There was no point. Instead, I poured myself a drink and let the hours tick by, bracing myself for her arrival. At exactly 8:15, I heard the garage door rumble open, followed by the sound of her footsteps. My heart pounded, each beat echoing through my chest like a warning. She stepped inside, the click of her heels muffled on the carpet. She had a small, soft smile on her face, the kind she usually reserved for the rare quiet moments we shared after a long day. But this time, it felt different, forced, like a mask she was struggling to hold in place. "Hey," she said, shrugging off her coat and tossing it over the back of a chair. "Sorry I'm late. You know how flights can be." I forced myself to keep my expression neutral. "Yeah, no worries," I replied. "Welcome back." She stepped closer, reaching out to place a hand on my shoulder, but I moved, turning away under the pretense of grabbing a glass from the cabinet. "Want some wine?" I asked, not looking at her. "Sure," she replied, her voice faltering just slightly. We sat down at the table, glasses in hand. I watched her take a sip, her eyes darting away, a hint of something unspoken flickering there. I wondered if she could sense it, if she knew, on some instinctual level, that I was no longer in the dark. "So, how was the conference?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Oh, it was good," she replied, the words flowing easily, too easily. "Met a lot of great people. I think this new client is going to bring in a lot of business." "Sounds productive," I said, giving a slight nod. "Must be exhausting, though, traveling so much." She shrugged, offering a practiced smile. "You get used to it. It's just part of the job." She took another sip, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the side of her glass, a telltale sign she was nervous. I decided to test the waters. "Ran into Rick the other night," I said, my eyes fixed on her. "He mentioned something interesting about trust. About how we all have blind spots, especially when it comes to people we care about." Her smile froze, and I saw her grip on the glass tighten. But she was quick, recovering almost instantly. "Oh?" she asked, her voice light, as though she wasn't affected. "What did he say?" "He said that sometimes we're so close to people, we miss the warning signs." I took a slow sip, letting the words sink in. It's easy to get comfortable, to trust someone just because you think you know them. Lucy chuckled, though the sound was a bit too high, too forced. "Well, that sounds cynical." "Maybe," I replied, shrugging. "But maybe it's also realistic. We all have secrets, right?" Her face hardened, just for a second, but enough for me to see it. She tried to mask it, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, but I knew I'd struck a nerve. "Mark, is something going on?" she asked, feigning innocence, but her voice carried a wary edge. I took a long breath, the anger I'd kept buried threatening to boil over. I was ready to unload everything, to lay out all the evidence right then and there. But something held me back. I wanted to let her dig her own grave, to see how far she would go to cover up her lies. "Just thinking out loud," I replied, my voice calm, even. "Relationships aren't always easy. It's good to be honest about that." Her gaze held mine, wary, suspicious. I could tell she was trying to figure out if I knew. "Well," she said finally, her voice carefully measured, "I agree. Honesty is important. But so is trust." The irony in her words was so thick, I nearly laughed. "Right," I replied. "Trust." We fell into silence, the weight of it settling heavily between us. She drained the rest of her wine and stood, forcing a smile as she headed toward the stairs. "I'm going to unpack and take a shower," she said, the words almost a dismissal. "Sure," I replied, watching her walk away. But even as she disappeared up the stairs, I stayed seated, my mind racing with the next steps. I had what I needed, but there was something satisfying in watching her try to maintain the facade, knowing it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. When I went to bed that night, I didn't touch her. She lay there, her back turned to me, and I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I felt like I was lying next to a stranger. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened. She got up early, made coffee, and went about her routine with that same practiced ease. But I couldn't play along anymore. I knew what I had to do. When she left for work, I called a private investigator. I didn't want any loose ends, no gaps in my knowledge. I wanted to be absolutely sure, to eliminate even the smallest chance of her wriggling out of this. The investigator agreed to track her for the next few weeks, and I paid extra to ensure he'd be thorough. No missed details, no excuses. The days that followed were a strange kind of torture. I went to work, saw friends, smiled at neighbors, all while carrying this silent rage, a ticking time bomb just waiting for the right moment to go off. At night, I'd sit on the edge of the bed, staring at her while she slept, wondering how someone who looked so innocent could be so full of deceit. It was almost surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. 2 weeks passed before I heard back from the investigator. When his call came in, I answered immediately, heart pounding. "Mark, I've got what you need," he said, his voice calm but certain. "What did you find?" "Your wife has been meeting with a man named Mike at a hotel downtown. They've met 3 times in the past 2 weeks, always during her late nights at work. I have photos, timestamps, credit card charges. Everything you need." I gripped the phone, a strange sense of relief flooding over me. There it was, concrete, undeniable proof. She couldn't talk her way out of this, couldn't lie to cover it up. "Send me everything," I replied, my voice cold. "I want it all." When the package arrived a day later, I opened it with shaking hands. Inside were photos of Lucy with Mike, snapshots of them laughing together, holding hands, walking into the hotel arm in arm. The evidence was overwhelming, absolute. That night, I waited for her to come home, the weight of the truth sitting like a stone in my chest. She walked in, the same familiar smile on her face, the same false warmth in her voice. She had no idea what was waiting for her, no idea that the game was over. "Hey," she greeted me, leaning in to kiss my cheek, her touch repulsing me now. I stepped back, holding up the envelope of photos, my voice low and steady. "We need to talk, Lucy." Her face went pale, the smile fading as she looked at the envelope. I saw the realization dawn on her, the panic rising in her eyes as she reached for it, her hand trembling. What is this?" she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's the truth," I replied, my voice hard as steel. "It's time you stopped lying, Lucy. Tell me everything, or I'll tell everyone else." Lucy stared at me, frozen. Her hand shook as she clutched the envelope of damning photos. I could almost see her mind racing, scrambling for a way to salvage her lies. But there was nothing she could say, and we both knew it. The truth hung between us, a thick, poisonous fog she could no longer hide in. After a moment, she lowered the envelope and looked up at me, her face drained of color. "Mark," she began, her voice breaking. "It's not what you think." A bitter laugh escaped me, sharper than I intended. "It's not what I think?" I echoed. "Then by all means, Lucy, tell me what it is. Tell me what I'm seeing when I look at photos of you meeting some other man, sneaking into hotels together while I'm at home thinking you're working late. Enlighten me." She looked down, her eyes flickering with something, regret, shame, maybe even fear. But it was too late for apologies, too late for excuses. It was just a mistake," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to happen. Didn't mean for it to happen." My anger flared again, sharp and unforgiving. "Lucy, you didn't just trip and fall into a hotel with him. This took planning. Lies. You looked me in the eye and lied to me over and over, and now you're telling me it was a mistake." She shifted uncomfortably, looking away, her fingers twisting around the hem of her sweater. "I was lonely," she whispered. "You were always so busy with work, so distracted. It felt like you weren't there for me anymore." I stared at her, stunned. She was actually trying to blame this on me. "You're seriously doing this?" I asked, my voice cold. "You're turning this around on me? Do you think that excuses any of it?" Her silence was answer enough. In that moment, something snapped inside me. I'd held on to anger, bitterness, all the hurt she'd caused, but now it felt hollow, like ashes in my mouth. I'd expected this conversation to be full of fireworks, tears, shouting. But all I felt was a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching from a distance. "Lucy," I said, my voice level, "you took something good and threw it away. We could have worked through anything if you'd just been honest. But you chose this. You chose to betray me." I took a deep breath, letting the reality of my own words settle over me. "And now, it's over." Her eyes widened, her face crumbling. "Mark, please. Don't say that. We can work through this, I know we can." She reached for me, desperation filling her gaze, but I stepped back, out of reach. "Work through this?" I repeated, shaking my head. "Lucy, this isn't something you work through. You made your choice." Her tears came then, spilling down her cheeks as she tried to hold herself together. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I was stupid. I didn't think about what I'd lose. I love you, Mark. Please, let's just try to move past this. I'll do anything. I'll go to counseling. I'll quit my job if that's what it takes. Please, just don't leave me." But her words only felt hollow now. How many nights had I laid awake, my mind racing with doubts? How many lies had she spun so effortlessly, each one cutting a little deeper, until nothing was left of the trust we'd built together? I watched her, waiting for the wave of sorrow or sympathy, anything that might make me want to forgive her. But all I felt was emptiness, a strange clarity that settled over me as I realized there was no going back. "No, Lucy," I said quietly. "It's over." She looked at me, her face twisted in anguish, but I held firm, refusing to be swayed by her tears. "Please, Mark," she choked out, her voice a broken plea. "Don't do this. I'll change. I swear. I'll make it right." But I shook my head, stepping back further, creating the space I needed to keep her from reaching me. "There's nothing left to fix," I replied, my voice calm, resolute. "You made a choice, and this is the consequence." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing in the empty silence. My chest felt tight, a mixture of pain and relief twisting inside me. For so long, I'd felt trapped in the dark, drowning in suspicions and doubts. Now, finally, I had clarity. I had control. Over the next week, I set my plans in motion. I wasn't just ending the marriage, I was making sure Lucy would feel the weight of her choices. I filed for divorce, citing infidelity, and made arrangements to secure everything that mattered to me, our home, our assets, even custody of our dog, Buster. Lucy had betrayed me, but I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. When the papers were served, she tried to plead her case, alternating between apologies and anger, accusing me of being heartless, of giving up too easily. But I didn't listen. I let her words roll off me, like rain against a window. I had made my decision, and there was no turning back. In the months that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. I moved into a small apartment downtown, closer to work, and threw myself into projects, staying late, picking up extra responsibilities. Work became my refuge, a place where I could escape from the chaos my life had become. Friends reached out, offering support, but I kept them at a distance, too drained to explain everything, too exhausted to relive the betrayal over and over. Lucy, meanwhile, tried to reach out, sending me texts, emails, voicemails, each one begging for another chance. I read each message, felt the faintest pang of something, regret, maybe, but I never replied. She was no longer my problem. One night, months after the dust had settled, I found myself at a bar, nursing a drink alone. The place was dimly lit, quiet, the kind of spot where people came to forget their troubles. I sat there, staring into my glass, letting the silence settle around me, when a voice broke through. "Mind if I join you?" I looked up to see a woman standing there, a soft smile on her face, her eyes warm and inviting. There was a kindness in her gaze, something genuine that made me pause. "Sure," I replied, gesturing to the seat beside me. We talked for hours, about everything and nothing. Her name was Claire, and she was kind, funny, easy to talk to. She didn't pry, didn't ask about the divorce or why I was sitting alone in a bar, and for that, I was grateful. With her, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. When we parted ways that night, she handed me her number with a small smile. "Call me sometime," she said, her eyes meeting mine, full of quiet understanding. I took the number, slipping it into my pocket with a nod. As I watched her walk away, I felt something shift inside me. I was done letting the past define me. Lucy's betrayal had scarred me, left wounds that might never fully heal, but it didn't own me. I walked out of the bar that night feeling lighter, the weight of Lucy's lies and my anger fading with each step. There was a whole world out there waiting, and I was ready to face it, one step at a time. The months that followed my night at the bar with Claire brought a strange, quiet peace. We'd been seeing each other casually, meeting for coffee or a quick dinner after work. Nothing too intense, nothing like what I had with Lucy. Claire was just there. She was calm, steady, and her presence was soothing, like an anchor in the storm that had been my life. Over time, though, she became more than just a friend. She made me laugh in a way I hadn't laughed in years, reminded me of things I had forgotten about myself. I felt pieces of me come back, fragments of joy and hope I'd thought were long gone. Claire was different from Lucy in every way, she was genuine, unguarded, easy to be around. I found myself wanting more, wanting a life that wasn't shadowed by betrayal and broken trust. For the first time since the divorce, I felt like I could truly move on. One cold evening in December, we were sitting on the couch in my apartment, huddled under a blanket, watching a movie. Her head rested on my shoulder, her hand tucked into mine, and I felt a warmth that I hadn't felt in years. This was what I wanted. A quiet, real kind of happiness. I turned to her, a question bubbling to the surface, one I hadn't dared ask myself until now. "Claire," I said softly, my heart beating faster. "Do you think, maybe we could make this something more? I know we've kept things casual, but I think I'm ready to be serious with you." She looked up at me, her eyes soft, a smile breaking across her face. "I'd like that," she whispered, her hand tightening around mine. In that moment, I felt the future open up, wide and welcoming, something I could finally believe in. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. But life doesn't let you linger in those moments for long. A week later, I got a call from Lucy. I'd ignored most of her attempts to contact me, deleting her voicemails, glancing through her texts before clearing them away. But this time, something in her voice caught my attention. She sounded different. Broken. "Mark," she whispered, her voice shaky, barely audible. "I'm sorry to bother you. I know you don't want to hear from me, but I need to see you. Just once. It's important." Every instinct told me to ignore her, to leave her in the past where she belonged. But something stopped me. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was a faint trace of pity, a remnant of who we had once been together. Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her. We chose a quiet cafe on the edge of town. I arrived first, sitting at a table by the window, watching as the snow drifted down in soft, swirling flakes. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked thinner, paler, as if the life had been drained out of her. She gave me a small, tentative smile, and I noticed how her hands trembled as she pulled out the chair. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly, her eyes downcast. "I didn't think you would." I shrugged, keeping my expression guarded. "What's this about, Lucy?" She looked away, her fingers twisting nervously around the edge of her scarf. "I wanted to apologize," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I hurt you. And I know no amount of apologies can change that, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything." I watched her, waiting for the excuses, the justifications, but they never came. Instead, she looked up, her eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't quite understand. "I made a terrible mistake, Mark," she continued, her voice breaking. "I thought I was looking for excitement, but I was really just lost. I took you for granted. I thought you'd always be there. But you're not, and now I have to live with that." Her words struck something deep inside me, an ache that I'd buried long ago. But I pushed it down, keeping my expression neutral. "Lucy, we both made our choices. I moved on. You need to do the same." She nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "I know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I wanted to tell you that I'm proud of you. For moving on. For finding someone who makes you happy." I didn't respond, unsure of what to say. She watched me for a moment longer, a strange, almost wistful expression on her face, before standing up, her scarf clutched tightly in her hand. "Goodbye, Mark," she said softly, her eyes meeting mine. "I really do wish you the best." With that, she turned and walked out of the cafe, leaving me sitting there, alone. I watched her go, feeling a strange heaviness settle over me, a mix of sorrow and relief. I wanted to believe that this was the last time, that she would finally disappear from my life for good. But something about her words lingered, a faint, unsettling feeling I couldn't shake. The days passed, and I tried to forget about our meeting. I focused on work, on my budding relationship with Claire, on the life I was trying to rebuild. But every so often, a shadow of doubt crept in, a nagging worry I couldn't explain. And then, one afternoon, a phone call shattered the fragile peace I had found. It was Lucy's sister, her voice thick with grief. "Mark," she choked out, "I don't know how to say this, but Lucy's gone. She took her own life last night." The world seemed to tilt, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. I clutched the edge of the counter, the phone slipping in my hand. "What?" I managed, my voice barely a whisper. She left a note," her sister continued, her voice breaking. She said she couldn't live with the guilt. That she was sorry. For everything." The room blurred, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a vice. I sank onto the floor, the phone slipping from my grasp as the truth settled over me, cold and unyielding. Lucy was gone. Forever. And all I was left with was the knowledge that she had carried her regret to the grave. The funeral was a small, somber affair. I stood at the back, watching as they lowered her casket into the ground, the finality of it all pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. Claire stood by my side, her hand in mine, her presence a quiet comfort in the midst of the overwhelming sorrow. In the days that followed, I tried to pick up the pieces, to move forward. But Lucy's absence lingered, a shadow that followed me wherever I went. I'd lost her long before she was gone, but knowing that she had carried her pain alone, that she had left this world without ever finding peace, it haunted me. One night, as I sat alone in the quiet of my apartment, I found myself reaching for her last message, a faint spark of her words preserved in the digital silence. "I'm sorry. I wish things had been different." The tears came then, hot and unbidden, spilling down my cheeks as I realized the truth. I had moved on, but I hadn't healed. I had carried the bitterness with me, letting it fester, letting it consume me. And now, Lucy was gone, and all that was left was the emptiness, the hollow ache of unfinished words, unspoken forgiveness. In the end, there was no revenge, no triumph. Just loss, stark and unforgiving, a reminder of everything we had broken, of the love we had let slip through our fingers. Jeans that had cost me everything.